And celebration is a little bit about what I wanted to talk about this morning. Because this week, starting Monday night and going into Tuesday, is Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel Independence Day. Right? I tried to wear some of my Israeliest colors today in honor of that this Shabbat. And it's a time of joy and celebration. In fact, the joy and celebration that we're supposed to have on Yom Ha'atzmaut is so much that it actually supersedes the morning rituals of the Omer. You can listen, for those that don't listen to music or cut their hair and shave during the Omer, according to the movement, actually, the conservative movement, you can on Yom Ha'atzmaut. Because the joy we feel of a Jewish homeland, it's so great that it overrides those mourning practices. And yet, we've been feeling this, I think, for all of our celebrations since Simchat Torah, that it's really hard to be joyful right now. It was hard to sing and dance with the Torah here as bits and pieces of the news were coming in of what was happening in southern Israel. The brutal terrorist attack, the massacre, women, children, the elderly, whole families. And in the diaspora, we were dancing. It was supposed to be a day of celebration. It was hard and difficult. And that cloud has hung over us because the war in Gaza, the war to root out Hamas, the perpetrators of that terrible attack, continues. And another war has begun and is only intensified. The war out here in the diaspora. What we see happening from our politicians, on our social media, from the public, on our university campuses, and now the encampments. I know my sermon's usually about 11 o'clock, which we're a couple of minutes after right now. That right now the Occupy U of T is supposed to be having a press conference. I hope their press conference is that they've decided to close up. But sadly, so many seem to want to hear what these people have to say. They want to listen to one side, the side of the story that is distorted and twisted and convoluted, a side of the story where it's okay to say things like Zionists should die, despite the fact that every Jew should be a Zionist. Despite the fact that there may be some token Jews that want to go stand on the other side and say that Judaism and Zionism have nothing to do with each other. If you open the Siddur, if you're reading along in the Hebrew, if you understood, or in the English at any part of our service, you can see that for 2,000 years, Israel has been an integral part of what it means to be a Jew. Similar with our Haftorah. Since the moment our ancestors were expelled, it's been our dream to return. And so the fact that in 1948, we made that happen. We reestablished a Jewish homeland in our native land. We reestablished Jewish sovereignty. It's something to celebrate. But again, like many of you, I don't know that I feel like celebrating this week. So I wanted to share this morning, actually, not just some of my own thoughts, but I wanted to read to you a few excerpts from the experiences of 3 different Jews. The first is Rabbi Berelwein. And this is his recollection of his experience as a young boy growing up in Chicago, attending a very orthodox yeshiva system, populated with rabbis that had fled Europe, that were trying to rebuild what they knew of Jewish life there in America at the time. And he says, I remember the day the state of Israel was declared. It was a Friday afternoon. I walked to shul with my father of blessed memory, who was not an especially outwardly emotional person. He had the stoicism of the Lithuanian Jews. But as we walked to shul, I saw that he was weeping. It made an impression upon me. That Sunday night, the Zionist organization in Chicago sponsored a rally on behalf of the state of Israel at Chicago Stadium, where the basketball team played. There were about 20,000 Jews inside the stadium, another 40 to 50,000 in the parking lot. Golda Meir was the guest of honor. She was in America raising funding for purchasing arms on the open market in Europe, since the American government wouldn't sell arms to Israel. The program began with the raising of the Israeli flag to the stadium rafters. When that happened, 2,000 years of exile poured out of us. It was a sea of tears. Had I been running the program, I would have said, that's it, end it now. You're not going to find something better than that moment. All of my teachers from the yeshiva were in attendance, though none of them were Zionists. It made a tremendous impression upon us. He writes about when Ben-Gurion came to Chicago to sell Israel bonds in the 1950s. There was a meeting at a big hotel, and they went out of curiosity even though they couldn't afford to buy a bond. But they wanted to see what Ben-Gurion looked like. Our Rebbe, who is also not a Zionist, was there. The next day during the shur, he asked, what did you see last night? He would always ask these kinds of questions to give us a different perspective. I saw over 500 people, and somebody speaking wasn't the answer he was looking for. He said, what I saw was that the children of Abraham stood in line to give money away. That's what I saw. The emotions of what it would have been to experience that, to have lived. He wasn't a survivor himself, but to have lived in the era of knowing what happened in the Shoah, to see the sprouting of a Jewish state. I know some of you know firsthand what that experience is. But for many of us, we've grown up in a world where there always has been in Israel. It's hard to imagine that sense of the miraculous. 2,000 years of diaspora, of exile poured out of us. I want to share the words of Rabbanit Miriam Hauer. She was born in Czechoslovakia, and in 1943, she and her parents and brother and sister fled to Israel when she was 10 years old. Before the declaration of Israel, she says, that after the United Nations adopted the resolution that would divide Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states, the trouble started. Our beautiful apartment was in a tall building surrounded by trees. Our windows faced the sea and Yaffo and Arabs. And they would fire from mosques into Yaffo towards Tel Aviv. We would collect 20 to 30 bullets, mainly at night. They would come through my bedroom window. I couldn't sleep in my bed. I had to sleep in the bathtub because it was metal and couldn't be breached. In addition, unfortunately, the company that supplied electricity to the whole city was nearby. And whenever attacks began, it was the first site to be targeted. She then writes about the experience in 1948, hearing the declaration of Israel's independence. It was a Friday afternoon. We heard people were congregating at the Tel Aviv Museum on Sderot Rothschild, a block away from our apartment. We learned that Ben-Gurion had arrived to declare independence. The location of the ceremony was supposed to be a secret. Crowds had started gathering. My father said to us, children, we are running down to Rothschild. Something important is about to happen. We stood in front of the museum that Friday and heard the declaration. The exhilaration we felt was indescribable. It was a tremendous, albeit very dangerous step, but we were ready. We knew that as soon as independence was declared, 7 nations would attack us. What would happen? We were 600,000 Jews. No airplanes, no tanks, not even an army. Just some hidden weapons and 3 groups who were ready to fight. We returned home very excited to welcome Shabbat as citizens of Medinat Yisrael. In the synagogues, we recited Hallel and the Tefillah for the state of Israel, for the land of Israel. Immediately, Egypt began bombing us. Over time, shelters weren't very effective. Shelters which weren't very effective were added. But initially we had no shelters, only some walls made of bricks at every house entrance. But life had to go on, schools remained open. I remember walking to school knowing that every time we heard a boom, an enemy plane was flying overhead since Israel didn't have an air force. When we heard a boom, we would lie down in the street so the pilot couldn't target us. Attending school was an adventure. One day, the house across the street from school was hit, and all we could do was hide under our desks. Again, that joy, that sense of celebration, but also knowing that things were only going to get worse despite that sense of joy. That the attacks from the Arab neighbors were only going to become more extreme, supported by 7 nations of Arab armies. Yet still, that Shabbat, they celebrated. Not because of what had happened to them in the past, not because of what was going to happen, but despite it, because it was something to celebrate. The last part, and I'll share, I promise, a briefer excerpt. But Rabbi Tuvia Geffen, he was a rabbi at a synagogue in Atlanta. And this is some of what he shared to his congregation on Shabbat morning, May 15th, 1948, also Parshat Kedoshim. He spoke about the fact that right before their eyes, they were witnessing the miracle of the Asmoneans, the miracle of the many falling into the hands of the few. While we are full of joy, we also pray for the guardian of Israel, that God might preserve and protect the courageous Jewish youth standing in the Judean hills and the Galilee, battling against the enemy with devotion. Our words are penetrated with deep sorrow and dreadful pain for the millions of pure and holy people who died as martyrs. May God take vengeance before our eyes for the servant's blood which has been shed. Indeed, ours is a miserable generation which has seen dreadful destruction. However, we also bear in our heart a deep feeling of consolation that this very generation has been privileged to see the revival of the nation and the establishment of the Jewish state. At this festive hour when the Jewish heart is overflowing with worry and joy, it's the duty of all Jews from all strata and varieties to help bear the historical responsibility to perform the greatest task in the history of the Jewish people. Let us not rest until the security of the Jewish state is assured, as it's attacked from within and without. As is the Yishuv in the land of Israel, indeed here, we must also mobilize all our forces and be prepared to offer anything for this mission, the establishment of the Jewish state for the Jewish people. In all of these, the authors had an experience that I can only begin to imagine. I can only try to approach from hearing accounts from those that lived it and from reading the words of those who are no longer here to share their stories. But what it meant to see that moment after 2,000 years when our hopes and our prayers were answered, when our dreams were realized. Our Parshat this week, Kedoshim, holiness, is a tough one sometimes. It's often read together with the one that comes before it, Achrei Mot, after the death of Aaron's sons. And you get these two ideas that just don't feel like they connect together. After death, holiness. How can something be sacred in a moment when our hearts are broken? How can we feel joy when all we want to do sometimes is sit down in the dark and cry? But I look towards those who were there in those moments, those who lived through that trauma, who lived through the chance that all of this might be in vain, that Israel, this newly founded state, may disappear just as quickly as it came back onto the map. So what I would say is this week, as we prepare ourselves, Sunday night begins Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel Memorial Day. a day of mourning for all the soldiers who have fallen in defense of Medinat Yisrael, our homeland. And that day goes into the next Yom Ha'atzmaut. Because it's something perhaps I think Israelis understand more than we do in the diaspora. That those two feelings, as an Israeli, surrounded by nations that just want your destruction, surrounded by neighbors that hate you, surrounded always by the chance that the supermarket you go to or the mall, the movie theater, the cafeteria, the bus stop, the pizza parlor might be your last trip because of the hatred of others. Israelis understand that sometimes it's when our hearts are broken, when we're feeling that pain and that sorrow that we most need to celebrate. And so I invite all of us, because I think this year in particular we need it, to be prepared to celebrate, to observe Yom HaZikaron, to observe this day of mourning, to memorialize the fallen, and then to take a break from our mourning, to take 24 hours, Yom Ha'atzmaut, and feel the joy that after 2,000 years, our dreams have been fulfilled, our prayers have been answered. I want to invite everyone to rise, even though we usually do this at the end of our service. But I thought this week we would sing Hatikva here to prepare to celebrate this moment and this day.
Aleva penima nefesh Yehudi homia ulfate mizrach kadima ayin letzion Sophia. Lo avda tikvatenu, hatikva bat shnot alpayim, liot am chofshi be'atzenu, Eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim. Liyotam choshi be'atzenu, Eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim.
Never before in history has the world seen a people move across the globe in a way that wasn't colonization. So they don't have a language for it. But it's what we just said there in Hatikva, Liot am chofshi be'artzenu, to be a free people in our land. That's what the Jewish dream has been for 2,000 years. So I hope you'll join me this week in a day of celebration. Shabbat Shalom.